What's up, y'all? bdougie here, and I was thinking through something which is AI is really just an intention amplifier. And what that means is if you have the intention to write really good code, AI just amplifies that. Let me show you what I mean. So jumping over to my editor, I've got just a blank project, and I say blank because it's got some other files in there, and I'll talk about the other files in a sec, but first, I just want to jump in here and explain what I'm about to write, which is my spec. My spec specifically is the problem that I'm looking to solve. And this problem is called the game of life. Now, the game of life is a little programming exercise for really just manipulating interactions in code. And specifically, the game itself has cells. So you have a game board where you have a bunch of spaces on the game board, and each game board can take a space or a cell. A cell could be alive or dead. So if it's got a marker there, it's alive. If it's not, it's dead. Usually you could use like zeros and ones, but I say all that because this is basically just a programming exercise that I just want to show you how to amplify your developer experience. The spec here is basically just explaining how to interact in the game and how to approach this writing in code. This is going to be beneficial because I'm going to leverage an agent to essentially just write this code for me, but I've got some other things I want to show you as well. So the other thing I want to show you is actually my rules file. The rules file specifically is when you're working with agents, you want to have some guardrails to have them write code in a way that's constructive, but also it's going to be clean. And clean based on how me as a senior engineer is going to be writing code if I were to write this myself. And since I showed you the spec, I'm going to actually jump over and open up my assistant. So I've opened the Continue Assistant, and the Continue Assistant specifically is a VS Code extension in this case, and I'm going to be able to interact and leverage agent mode to build this program. And what I have here is I've got the prompt written out, which I just pasted, and I'm going to essentially just leverage the specmd to generate the game of life using test-driven development. The other thing I want to mention is I'm going to make sure it starts with 100 generations by default. This is so it actually refreshes over and over again. And then the other thing is I'm going to create a new file called game.rb. So let's see what happens. Cool. And what's interesting about this is actually starting with the spec file. And when I mentioned test-driven development, I mentioned this because I wanted to write tests first to ensure that the game's going to work out of the box. So the one thing I also wanted to point out is I have a rules file. The rules file itself is going to help the assistant have some guardrails. And this is the thing about amplification. If you have the intention to be productive and really good code, you can accelerate or amplify those intentions by having rules. So here it's adhering to the rules. I did not mention at all to write a spec file. I mentioned test-driven development to nudge in the right direction. It knows in the rules, and it's already created my test file. So what's cool about that, it just generated the spec file, which is pretty cool. These are my RSpec tests. So I'm going to probably need to go and install RSpec, but it probably knows this already. So I skipped ahead. It also generated the game RB, but I also wanted to point out it did create the gem file as well. So the gem file is to install the dependency RSpec. I could also make a rule where no third-party dependencies. We write this all in-house. We could create our own test file, but that would be a bit of a longer video. And the one thing I actually wanted to point out real quick, as I'm running the test, it's going to be implementing features. Specifically in this case, it's going to implement the entire feature set in the file because it's going to be super simple. So here in the assistant, you're getting feedback because we're using Claude 4. And we're getting feedback to basically say, perfect, tests are failing because we haven't implemented the grid class yet. And this is perfect because what's great about this is test-driven development. Implement the test first, watch it fail, and then watch it implement. So moving down here, you can see the grid's been implemented, and then we're going to proceed to building the rest of this project. So with all the tests passing, let's just go ahead and run the app. And excellent. So we have the game of life. So the one I got to point out is there's a couple of extra things I could have did in my rules. I could have actually adhered to strictly writing tests and watching them fail. I've seen that happen a few times. It didn't happen explicitly. The game is completed 100 generations. But this is the game of life. I imagine not everyone's writing little command line interfaces for fun in side projects. Everyone's got a larger code base that they're working with at work. The idea there is that you can actually help your assistant to know how you and your team write code. And this is what really amplifying developers means. It's essentially leveraging AI to have a native experience where you can accelerate the productivity of you and your team. And with that said, I'm bdougie, and I'll see you in the next one.